Good morning, everyone. I know it has been a little bit since I have been live on Fridays, and so I apologize for the gap in my attendance and lack of my voice. I know that my colleagues, gifted and talented as they are, have done more than enough to make up for my absence, and yet I have missed being with you on Fridays, and I do have some thoughts to offer this weekend of the 4th of July. So this morning, what I would like to do is offer some reflections on freedom. And I would like to do so by beginning with Frederick Douglass, touching then on Galatians, very specific passage in Galatians, which no doubt is familiar to many of you. And then I'd like to close with some considerations from Angela Davis. If you're unfamiliar with Frederick Douglass or Angela Davis, I would encourage you to pay attention to the comments after we are done with this live video. What I will do is actually put into the comments some things that I have been drawing on for this morning's reflection. And I hope that you might engage with them and see them. If, like me, you have been looking for ways to be more engaged in this present moment in our country, I think that part of that is education, and it's not something that we can expect other people to do, certainly not people of color whose job it is not actually to educate us. What's interesting is that everything that we need is already out there, and it's up to us to go pursue it. And so I think it's good sometimes to, yes, ask for lists and things, but then just to start reading. And so there's some things that you might want to read after this reflection this morning. But Frederick Douglass, in 1952, on July 5th, he gave a keynote address in an Independence Day celebration that was called "What to the Slave is the 4th of July?" And this was given at Corinthian Hall in Rochester, New York. And it was a pretty remarkable speech. So 1852, you know, of course, that slavery at this point had not been abolished and was very much a reality present, a brutal reality that was not a flaw but a feature in our country's fabric. That fabric would be torn by the Civil War that was, you know, the Civil War was in many ways a tearing of that fabric and the wresting of slavery out of it by violence. But of course, that was just one step along the way in a long struggle for freedom that continues to this day. And so Frederick Douglass, in this speech that he gave, it's not the kind of speech you might feel comfortable with at a baseball game on the 4th of July. And it's even more remarkable that Douglass gave this in the moment that he did. And he's worth looking up and learning more about. But I would like to start with just the first 4 paragraphs of Frederick Douglass's speech, "What to the Slave is the 4th of July?" And so here's how that speech starts. "Fellow citizens, I am not wanting in respect for the fathers of this republic. The signers of the Declaration of Independence were brave men. They were great men, too, great enough to give frame to a great age. It does not often happen to a nation to raise at one time such a number of truly great men. The point from which I am compelled to view them is not certainly the most favorable, and yet I cannot contemplate their great deeds with less than admiration. They were statesmen, patriots and heroes for the good they did, and the principles they contended for. I will unite with you to honor their memory. Fellow citizens, pardon me, but allow me to ask, why am I called to speak here today? What have I or those I represent to do with your national independence? Are the great principles of political freedom and of natural justice embodied in that Declaration of Independence extended to us? And am I therefore called upon to bring our humble offering to the national altar and to confess the benefits and express devout gratitude for the blessings resulting from your independence to us? Would to God, both for your sakes and ours, that an affirmative answer could be truthfully returned to these questions. Then would my task be light and my burden easy and delightful, for who is there so cold that a nation's sympathy could not warm him? Who so obdurate and dead to the claims of gratitude that would not thankfully acknowledge such priceless benefits? Who so stolid and selfish that would not give his voice to swell the hallelujahs of a nation's jubilee, when the chains of servitude have been torn from his limbs? I am not like that man. In a case like that, the dumb might eloquently speak, and the lame man leap as an art. But such is not the state of the case. I say it with a sad sense of the disparity between us. I am not included within the pale of glorious anniversary. Your high independence only reveals the immeasurable distance between us. The blessings in which you this day rejoice are not enjoyed in common. The rich inheritance of justice, liberty, prosperity, and independence bequeathed by your fathers is shared by you, not by me. The sunlight that brought light and healing to you has brought stripes and death to me. This 4th of July is yours, not mine. You may rejoice, I must mourn. To drag a man in fetters to the grand illuminated temple of liberty and to call upon him to join you in joyous anthems were inhuman mockery and sacrilegious irony. Do you mean, citizens, to mock me by asking me to speak today? If so, there is a parallel to your conduct. And let me warn you that it is dangerous to copy the example of a nation whose crimes, towering up to heaven, were thrown down by the breath of the Almighty, burying that nation in irrevocable ruin. I can today take up the plaintive lament of a peeled and woe-smitten people. So those are just the first 4 paragraphs, and I encourage you to look at the breadth and depth of that full speech, which I'm going to go ahead and put into the comments right now. And the full speech comes from, is located on PBS's website. But what Douglas is talking about is that claims to freedom and the celebration of freedom is a strange thing to do in a country which is built on unfreedom and bondage. And I think that it is still striking to me today that when we celebrate something like the 4th of July, we do not all celebrate it in the same way. And it's irresponsible as people of faith, I think, to celebrate uncritically and as if, you know, we live in a utopia where all are free, for that is certainly not the case. And so I was thinking this morning about Frederick Douglass, and I thought of Dr. James Dunn, who passed away recently, who was long the executive director of the Baptist Joint Committee for Religious Liberty in Washington, D.C. He was also a faculty member at Wake Forest University. And for a long time, you know, being biblically illiterate, I thought this quote, you know, was attributable to Dr. Dunn. It's actually from Galatians. But Galatians 5:1 says, "For freedom, Christ has set us free." So for freedom, Christ has set us free. Stand firm, therefore, and do not submit again to a yoke of slavery. That passage is interesting to me because, in truth, for me, if we are white, freedom in America has been achieved by centuries of courageous rebellion against our brutality and violence. So the question for me today is, as we celebrate freedom, whose do we celebrate? Do we celebrate the freedom of those who have won it from us? Do we celebrate freedom yet to be achieved and that is being demanded as people are in the streets to this day? Or do we celebrate our own freedom from our original sin, which is, to my mind, genocide, slavery, and violence as instruments of racism? And that original sin, you know, if not confessed and if not moved from with repentance, this original sin, I think, is that which would still destroy our country today. And that's the original sin with which we are still struggling. And so today, and this weekend, as we contemplate freedom and celebration of freedom, we know that Christ has set us free, but that Christ has also set those free who we have kept in bondage, not just originally in slavery, but by continued maintenance of systems and structures of white supremacy that the vast majority of white Americans will not acknowledge even exist. And so, you know, this could be a relatively controversial thing in a different context. You know, if I were to go visit a random white Baptist church in the South, it might be quite controversial to suggest that we have yet to repent of our original sin. And I think that's still true even for those of us who are white and consider ourselves progressive. That's true for us too. Angela Davis is the one with whom I will close considerations this morning. She is a remarkable scholar, and I am reading a book by her right now called Are Prisons Obsolete? About the prison industrial complex. Many of you all know The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander, and Angela Davis's work certainly charted the path which Michelle Alexander took up. Angela Davis was active from quite a young age prolifically in the Black Power movement, fighting for liberation in America. And she is older now and still alive and teaching. And it's amazing that in a time where we are looking for voices to listen to, people are not more quickly turning to, or at least white people are not more quickly turning to, Angela Davis. I mean, she is incredible, and it is remarkable that I am still alive while she is still alive, or that I am alive while she's still alive. But the book that I want to reference today is just, it's not actually Are Prisons Obsolete? It's another book that's a collection of her thought with a foreword by Cornel West, and it's called Freedom is a Constant Struggle. And that is kind of the closing consideration I have for you today, is that freedom is not something which we achieve or have ever achieved and then existed in perpetually from its achievement. We have achieved moments of freedom or seasons of freedom or incremental experiences of freedom. And only recently are white people participating, fully and broadly in that achievement of freedom. For a long time, while there were certainly white people that participated, in many cases to the risk of their own lives, those white people who were part of that were far in the minority, and might still be argued as far in the minority. So it's a complicated thing to celebrate freedom. But Angela Davis, Dr. Angela Davis, reminds us that freedom is a constant struggle. And this is what she says, and I'll leave this with you to consider. What can we do? How can we do it? With whom? What tactics should be used? How should we define a strategy that is accessible to everyone, including a general public that has reached levels of depoliticization that can make atrocities seem acceptable? What is our vision? How can we make sure that we are talking to everyone? How can we catalyze and connect sustainable cross-border and radical movements? These are the types of questions that many activists ask themselves on a daily basis, questions that are anchored in the present and will shape our future. It is easy to feel discouraged and simply let go. There is no shame in that. We are, after all, engaged in a struggle that seems, if we look at it using a mainstream political framework and through a mass media prism, unwinnable. On the other hand, if we take a step back, look at the things from a broader angle, reflecting on what is happening all over the world in the history of struggle, the history of solidarity movements, it becomes clear, sometimes even obvious, that seemingly indestructible forces can be, thanks to people's willpower, sacrifices, and actions, easily broken. So that is in the introduction to Freedom is a Constant Struggle, another book worth reading. But this weekend, as you celebrate freedom, I think there is quite a bit that we might rightfully celebrate. For example, my great-grandfather was the army doctor that cared for the Nazi criminals who were war criminals put on trial at Nuremberg. And so I have in my own history Dr. Roy Martin, someone who served our country in a time when, in a sense, the freedom of all people around the world was threatened by the unique evil of the Nazi Party. So it's not to say that I don't recognize my own family and also our own country's things and moments in history that are worth celebrating, but it's far more complicated than I think I was led to believe growing up. And I think today, what I'm trying to do is, even in celebrating the 4th of July and our independence, when I say our independence, I know that that our has been very exclusive and continues to be very exclusive. I want to celebrate freedom for all people, and that means that I have to work for it. And I think that that is an act of faith. I think that the belief that this is not unwinnable, that there are things that we can do, is rooted in my belief that God is a God of resurrection, and that resurrection is not just an empty promise that we cannot know, but something that we can practice here and now in the ways that we live on a daily basis and the way that we live and love one another. And so that is what I would like for you to consider this weekend as you rest and celebrate in a difficult season, whether for you individually or in recognition of the moment that we are in nationally. Celebrate, but do so with honesty. Honesty both with regards to where we've come from, where we are now, and how much further we have to go. So I thank you all for considering this morning. If you want to, I will put in the links for some of these other resources and hope that you will consider checking them out. But it is a privilege to be in ministry alongside each of you at Highland Baptist Church. I have been very fortunate to see some of our youth in person the past few weeks in socially distant gatherings. I miss the in-person men's fellowship, which I cannot wait to begin again once we are allowed to meet in small groups. And my continued work with and alongside those who are in the LGBTQ community here at Highland, those seeking to be allies and the fight for justice, both inside of our church and outside of our church. I love all that I get to do at Highland, and it's a privilege to, out of that kind of very fortunate place that I have among you, to offer reflections such as this. I'd love to hear feedback. I'd love to talk more, and I hope to see each of you soon in the days ahead. I hope that you have a wonderful day and a wonderful 4th of July.